Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name's Neil Isco, and today we're going to talk about a different way to think about conversion optimization. This talk is for advanced practitioners who already pretty much know how to set up and run tests. In other webinars, we'll talk about statistical and other related issues. This talk is about strategy. Now, before we get started, let's have some quick housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded, so if you have to leave, you can come back and see it. If you have questions, type them in, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. And if you have any other comments, audio issues, any other type of feedback, just type it in as you've got it, and we'll look at it, and we will get back to you. So with that, why are we talking about hill climbing? What is it that we're going to be talking about in this webinar? Well, hill climbing is an abstraction. It's used by computer scientists and mathematicians to model search. It's about optimization. So when we're testing, we're searching. We're looking for a solution. Let's jump right into testing. Here's a mobile mock-up. We've got this headline, grow sales, save time, get organized. And let's say that this mobile site is currently converting at 1%. So the control is 1%. That's our conversion rate. And we have a hypothesis, and our hypothesis is, hey, let's make this site better by increasing the headline font size. Seems like a good idea. Of course, what does it have to do with hill climbing? Well, think about the testing process as climbing a hill. So the goal is to get to the top. One way to look at these hills is a wireframe. So here's a wireframe of a hill. Controls at the bottom, that's where we start. And our goal is to get to the top. So we run the test. 14-point headline, got a 1.3% conversion, 30% increase. God, that's great. And let's look at the wireframe now. So we've taken our first step up the hill. We tried something against the control, a little bit bigger headline. We got an increase. And now we're showing what that increase did. The increase is a step up the hill. So our first variation beats the control. Step up the hill, and what do? Well, we test again. If 14 worked, let's try 16. And in fact, 16 is better than 14. 16 points better than a 14-point headline. That variant gets us a little bit better than a 50% increase. So it's 1.55. That's good. And let's look at what that looks like on the wireframe. So now we're a couple of steps up the hill. 14-point was the first step, and then we try again, and we get a second step to 16. Bigger is better. And that's our theory. Let's try it. So we try it, and now we get an 18-point headline, and guess what? It's a 1.75% conversion rate. That's great. So we've just by changing our headline size, we've been increasing things, and it looks really good. Let's see it on the wireframe. Well, on the wireframe, now we're at the top of this hill. But how do you know if you're at the top? How do you ever know really where you are? Well, the mantra is always be testing. So we keep testing. We test and test and test again. And our theory had been bigger is better. So let's try bigger again. And now we try a 20-point headline. And the result of the 20-point headline is a 1.5% conversion rate. Geez, it didn't really work. The rate went down, but we knew eventually that increasing size couldn't work forever, and because nothing goes up forever. So let's look at headline. So it looks like, in this case, in the mobile application, with a huge headline, or an important headline, the headline font size gives us an increase from 12, it gives us an increase as we go from 12 to 14, and from 14 to 16, and from 16 to 18. But when we get to all the way up to 18, that's about all she wrote. So for the purposes of conversion optimization, what we've learned to date, and we've learned this regardless of whether we've drawn it on a hill, but we've learned that 18-point is pretty much what we need to do to maximize what we can get by changing this one variable. And let's look at the wireframe on that. So the way to look at the 18-point is it was a false summit. We thought it was the top, and it wasn't. Further increases are possible, but not from this hill. Another way to look at what a false summit is in mathematical terms, it's called a local maxima. And a local maxima is a trap that limits your gains. So another way to look at local maxima is you're very close to the hill, and all you can see is that particular hill. So when you're climbing that hill, you're on a hill, you climbed as high as you can climb, and it is a summit, but it's false with respect to all of the summits. So what we're really trying to do is we're trying to find global maximas, and a global maxima is the biggest conversion, the highest thing that you can get if you changed all variables. So we've been looking at two hills when we're searching for performance, but the search space can be huge because you can change anything on your site, and you can change them in all kinds of different ways. Now this graphic is a wireframe, and it's actually in dimensional space because every dimension is something that can be changed, but it's a way to think about the search process. So high level in this, why are we doing hill climbing? Well, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the highest performing set of variations. And when we search, we are looking for what is the highest point. So back to sort of your standard testing practice, that's exactly what you're doing when you're testing, is you're trying to figure out, okay, which set of variables can I change and how do I change them in such a way as to get to the top of the highest peak. So when you're looking at this wireframe is one set of contours. It's equally fine to say, gosh, set of hills, so the search space, the area that you're looking for, look at it as a big thing to look through, and then what we're going to do is try to figure out ways to get to the top of that. And it's all, the purpose of this is about improving your testing. So we've talked about, everybody agrees that always be testing is a great thing, and you want to test as much as you can. The hill climbing is about how can you test strategically, how can you think about test, how can you think about search, so that you can maximize your effectiveness while you're testing. Now, in other webinars, as I said, we'll be talking about statistical things, and we're going to talk about the cost of each step that you take and a variety of other technical details, but this is about high-level strategy. So in terms of high-level strategy, just think about testing as a journey through hilly changing terrain, and then how do you plan? How do you figure out how to do your testing journey? Well, the first strategy, and you hear this from all sorts of conversion rate practitioners expressed in different ways, but the way we'll say it in here is look for the biggest hill. Start with the big changes. So you come into a site, and your goal always is to increase the performance. The local maximas are traps, as we've said, and so what you want to try to do is at the very beginning, try to move big things around, try to make big changes, and what that does is it increases your chance that you will get on the right hill so that you don't have missteps along the way. So observation number one is look for the biggest hill. And that observation is also given in terms of make big changes when you talk about testing process. And the next one is this: don't be fooled by local maxima. The peak can be elusive. So along the way in your testing program, when you're testing one variation or two variations or n variations, sometimes you get stuck. And the cure for getting stuck is the same cure as our first suggestion, which is think about the possibility that there is a bigger hill that you just haven't found yet. And so you've been changing one section of the site, another section of the site. Perhaps you need to rethink it. Maybe you need to remove a number of elements. Maybe you need to look at structural things. But you want to make sure that you're actually looking at the whole search space. So one other way to look at these local maxima is you're off in a corner somewhere and you're getting gains based on something, but there are other things out there that can also give you gains. Okay, another strategy. Realize that context is critical. Flat points can be deceiving. So this is a picture of a mesa, and it could be a different, it's both a flat summit, it's a flat false summit. You can see beyond it mountains. So we climb to the top of the mesa by increasing font size or changing color, or making the border thicker, something like that. And now, if you're at the top of the mesa, no matter what step you take, you're either going to take a step down or you're going to take a step that's essentially sideways with respect to performance. So sometimes when you're seeing your testing results, you can see these results that look a little anomalous. It's like no matter what you do, things either stay the same or they get worse. I mean, how many of that? I'm sure that lots of people in this audience this happened to. You're testing and you've made all this progress. You've gotten to the top of the mesa and you think, darn, now no matter what I do, it's like I'm stuck somewhere. I either don't get additional gains or I'm going down. And that may be the case. So here's the visualization of that. You're just in a spot where you're temporarily stuck. It is a local maximum and it's flat. So tied to that is sometimes you have to take a step down in order to get to your goal. So when we have learnings from testing, when we try something and it just gets worse, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that in order to go up again, in order to actually get gains, you're going to have to bring in some other kind of dimension. You're going to have to look at your site in a different way, look at the elements that you're changing, do something in order to be able to change the way that your journey is continuing. So this is a strategy, an approach, and as we drill down in the questions, we'll get a little bit more specific. But the high-level takeaway from all this is if you think about your plan and think about how you are carrying out that plan, this is an abstraction which is used mathematically, but you can use it sort of conceptually to be able to get better results. The goal is always to get to the top, and wish you happy trails to you. So with that, let's open it up for questions. We've got a lot of questions here. So there's an immediate question about statistical errors. We know so much traffic on a testing website, and there's a few questions that are sort of in that direction. So without getting into a statistical drill down that'll bore everybody, let me talk sort of high level about what we're doing when we're testing. So typically when we're testing and when we're A/B testing, and we talk about statistically significant, so say statistically significant at 95% level, what we're trying to do there is we're trying to make sure that if we think that this thing is the best, that it actually is the best. So they call them error, type 1 and type 2 errors. And type 1 error is if you think you're right, you want to make sure that you're right. But there's another type of error called the type 2 error, which is what if something that might be right, you just don't have enough evidence. And so classically in A/B testing, if you think about, let's switch to a different domain, to pharmaceuticals, and you're testing the control, the existing state of the world against the new antibiotic, say, perfect thing to do. You got an A/B test and you want to absolutely, positively prove that it's significantly better than the other. So that's great. In a case though where you have to do step after step after step, it can also be true that if you spend the resources, in this case traffic, to find that you just to get to the next step up the hill, you may never get to the highest peak. And so what ends up happening is that in the end, you find the statistically significant climb, but as you go, there are ways to keep trying things as you go without as much traffic. So we can, there'll be a different webinar where we really drill into that. Hopefully that gave you a feeling for that answer. There's just as an aside, if you're interested in the kinds of ways to climb these hills and ways to approach this problem, my company Sentient, we have a product, Ascend, which uses artificial intelligence techniques to navigate the search space. And if you're interested in that, either go to the sentient.ai/ascend link or email ascend@sentient.ai, and they can get into details about a product that will do that. But I wanted to make sure that this webinar gives you the kind of information that you need for that. Something else that that people ask is, well, so how do you get started? How do you figure out what moves the needle? And there's no, I wish that there was some magic. I wish that there was a silver bullet, but it's really, this is about, about experience in terms of the users for this customer in that vertical, how they act. I mean, the obvious things that come up, and you've heard them in other webinars, are in the US and most European countries, clutter, removing clutter from a site will tend to increase your conversions. Removing multiple calls to action will increase your conversions, just the classic kind of things. And you can look at those in terms of these hills we're climbing. So there are certain ways to get quick gains, and there are certain ways to get overall gains. But high level, this is more about strategy, process, and planning. So we've got, I think we covered a couple of questions that were sort of on the same line that way. Let me see, we've got, okay, so we've got another question that says, I find all my tests only deliver very incremental improvements. What strategy have you found that helped me climb hills faster? Great question. So this goes back to the try to find the biggest hill. And the thing about it is oftentimes, and particularly if you've been running a long-term testing program and you found things that have moved the needle, and now you're in this world where no matter what you do, all you get are these small incremental improvements. You know, what happens over time is everything that you did in the past is probably right, but the world has changed. So over time, some of the big sites set the trend, set the expectation. And so what was trendy or what worked in October of last year, it might not work at all in June of this year. So the thing to do is look at the world as this changing place, and keep in mind that it's the reason that websites do these website refreshes. Now, from a conversion standpoint, it's pretty much the same thing in that if you're testing and testing and testing and you just realize incremental gains, step back and look at it as a whole brand new problem. So maybe in this search space analogy, maybe you've explored the search space thoroughly in the past and you've done a great job at it. But now the search space has changed. And so keep in mind that that the world is changing, and in this hill thing, either you're in a different set of hills or the ground is moving and new hills are forming. So thank you for that. Once again, let me switch to a thank you. We've got and we've got Jeremy's going to push a little poll out to you, and we'd appreciate if you could answer the questions for that. And thank you very much. We'll have other webinars in the future. Appreciate your time.